The millionaire was forced to marry a blind girl, but when she touched his face, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain slid down the glass windows of the black Bentley as Adrian Cole, the 30-year-old CEO of Cole Enterprises, stared at the thin folder lying on the seat beside him. Inside it, his father's will. Every clause felt like a chain tightening around his throat. Marry before your 30th birthday, the will said, or lose control of the company. The car stopped outside the Cole family estate. The lawyer's voice echoed in his mind from that morning. Your father wanted stability in the public image. We have already found a candidate. Adrian had laughed bitterly. A candidate? For what? A job interview or a marriage? Her name is Evelyn Hart. She is 24. She lost her sight in an accident 2 years ago. The foundation your father supports covers her living expenses. If you marry her, it satisfies the inheritance clause. He remembered staring out the window then, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and rain. A blind girl, a stranger, a contract that felt more like a sentence than a promise. When he arrived home, the study lights were still on. The lawyer and Adrian's stepbrother were waiting. Sign the marriage agreement, Adrian, the lawyer said softly. It is the only way to keep what your father built. Adrian signed. The pen barely trembled in his hand, but his heart did. The wedding was small, held in the Cole mansion's winter garden. White roses, glass chandeliers, and a silence heavy enough to hear every heartbeat. Evelyn stood there in a pale ivory dress, her hands resting lightly on the handle of her cane. She was calm, still, her face turned toward the sound of the officiant's voice. When the vows ended, she lifted her chin and said gently, "You do not have to pretend to love me, Mr. Cole. I understand what this is." Her tone was soft, but it cut deeper than any accusation. Adrian looked at her for the first time, not as a legal solution, but as a person. Her eyes, a pale blue clouded by blindness, held no fear, only quiet dignity. For a moment, he forgot every boardroom, every inheritance clause, every cold demand from the world that made him who he was. "I am not good at pretending," he said finally. "Then let us not pretend," she replied. "Let us simply survive the year." That night, after the ceremony, he handed her a folder in his office. "These are the terms," he said, keeping his voice even. "No interviews. No public affection unless necessary. No interference in company matters. After 1 year, you will receive the trust fund my father arranged for you. Then you are free." Evelyn traced the edge of the paper with her fingertips, a faint smile touching her lips. "I cannot read it," she said quietly. "But I believe you just described a prison, with a polite name." He said nothing. Guilt flickered somewhere deep, but pride swallowed it whole. Later that night, Adrian found himself watching her through the half-open door of the guest suite. She sat on the couch, her cane leaning against her knee, her hands folded neatly in her lap. No tears. No complaints, just stillness. When she reached out to find the cup of tea on the table, her hand trembled slightly, missing it by an inch. Without thinking, he stepped forward and placed it into her hand. "Thank you," she said softly, her fingers brushing his. "You are colder than the cup." "Oh?" He froze. It was true his hands were ice. His entire life had been built on control, precision, distance. Yet somehow, a woman who could not see had noticed what no one else ever did. As she took a sip, she tilted her head, listening to the sound of the rain against the glass. "It is a strange night for a marriage," she murmured. "So quiet, like the world is waiting for us to make a mistake." Adrian stared at her profile, at the calm courage in her stillness. For the first time, he wondered what would happen if this contract became something more than a deal between two broken people. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the mansion's windows. But inside, in that moment of silence, something unspoken began to move slow, fragile, alive. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Cole mansion. The storm from the night before had passed, but inside, the air still felt heavy, as if the thunder had left something behind. Evelyn walked carefully along the marble hallway, her fingers tracing the edge of the wall. She remembered every turn, every step she had counted since she arrived. She could not see the beauty of the mansion, but she could sense it, the quiet hum of expensive art, the faint scent of cologne that lingered whenever Adrian passed by. In the dining room, he was already seated, reading through a stack of business reports. His tie was perfect, his posture straight, his voice calm when he spoke. "Good morning. I asked the staff to prepare something simple. I was not sure what you prefer." She smiled faintly, following his voice to the chair across from him. "I am not very demanding, Mr. Cole. Toast and coffee will do." The maid set down her plate, the silverware clinking softly. Evelyn folded her hands neatly, her movements careful but composed. Adrian found himself watching her, how precise she was, how she never asked for help. For a moment, he almost forgot that this was all just an arrangement. When the silence stretched too long, she broke it with a quiet question. "You run a large company, do you not?" "I do," he replied, lowering his papers. "Cole Enterprises. Real estate, technology, and logistics. It is complicated." "Oh, everything important is complicated," she said. "But that does not make it less human." Her words caught him off guard. No one in his world spoke like that. Most people around him only cared about profits and quarterly reports. Yet here was this woman, who could not even see the world he ruled, reminding him what it meant to feel. Over the next few days, their lives found a rhythm. She would walk in the garden each morning, the sunlight warm against her face, her cane tapping lightly on the stone path. Sometimes he would watch from his office window, telling himself he was only making sure she did not fall. At night, they often shared dinner in the same quiet dining room. She would listen as he spoke about work, asking small but thoughtful questions. He was used to being admired, not understood, yet somehow Evelyn seemed to hear what he did not say. One evening, as he poured her a cup of tea, she asked gently, "Why did you agree to this marriage, Mr. Cole?" He paused. No one had asked him that directly before. "It was necessary," he said finally. "My father's will left me no choice." "Then we are both bound by what others decided for us," she murmured. "You by your father, and I by the accident that took my sight." "Oh." Her voice was steady, but the words lingered in the space between them like a confession. For the first time, he saw her not as a contract, but as someone who had lost as much as he had. A week later, Adrian took her to a charity gala hosted by his company. The media had been waiting to see the mysterious bride of the Cole heir. Flashing lights and whispered speculation filled the grand hall. Evelyn held onto his arm, her fingers light but firm. "If I stumble, pretend you did not notice," she whispered. He almost smiled. "I will not let you stumble." When they entered, the crowd turned. Conversations hushed. Some eyes were curious, others cruel. A reporter murmured near the front, "She is blind? Is this some publicity trick?" Adrian's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Evelyn took a small step forward. Her voice was clear and calm. "Do not worry," she said softly, turning her head toward the direction of the voices. "I may not see your faces, but I can still feel the warmth or the cold in the way you speak." A ripple of silence moved through the crowd. Adrian looked at her in quiet amazement. In a single sentence, she had silenced an entire room. Later that night, when the music played and people began to dance, Evelyn sat near the edge of the ballroom, her hands resting on her lap. Adrian approached her. "You handled them well," he said quietly. "I am used to being underestimated," she replied. "It helps me listen better." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Would you like to dance?" She tilted her head, surprised. "You do realize that I cannot follow steps." Then I will follow yours," he said. She smiled, unsure if he was serious, but when he guided her to the floor, she let herself trust him for the first time. The world around them blurred into music and whispers. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his on her waist, the rhythm slow, unhurried. For the first time since their wedding, Adrian felt something real, something that no contract could define. When they returned home, the lights in the mansion were low. Evelyn turned toward him at the door. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. For once I did not feel like a headline. He looked at her, the faint smile on her lips, the quiet strength in her voice. "You were never a headline, Evelyn," he said. "You just did not know it yet." She paused, her hand reaching out into the darkness until it found his sleeve. "Good night, Adrian." "Six." "Good night," he answered. But even after she disappeared down the hall, he stood there for a long moment, listening to the echo of her footsteps, and wondering when this marriage of necessity had begun to feel like something he did not want to end. The next few weeks unfolded like quiet chapters of a book that neither of them expected to read. Evelyn learned the rhythm of the mansion, the sound of the clock in the main hall striking 9, the faint hum of the elevator, the way Adrian's footsteps slowed whenever he passed her room. He had started leaving the door between their offices slightly open. At first, it was for convenience, or so he said. But sometimes she would hear him pause, as if waiting for her voice to cross the space. And sometimes it did. "How do you know when a deal is fair?" she asked one afternoon. "When both sides feel they are losing something," he replied. She smiled. "Then I suppose we are in the fairest deal of all." Her honesty disarmed him. He was used to sharp minds and guarded hearts, yet she spoke like someone who had nothing left to hide. One morning, Adrian found her in the library, sitting near the piano. Her fingers were moving gently across the keys, not pressing them, just tracing their edges like she was remembering the sound. "You play?" he asked. "I used to," she said. "After the accident, I could not stand the silence, so I started listening instead." "Listening to what?" "To people," she replied. "To the things they try to hide between their words." He wanted to say something, anything, but the way she turned her face toward him made his throat tighten. She was blind, yet he felt completely seen. That night, the housekeeper brought a stack of letters to Adrian's study business proposals, contracts, and one envelope marked Cole Foundation. He opened it, scanning quickly. It was a report about the charity fund his father had set up for the blind. Evelyn's name appeared at the top of the sponsorship list. He stared at it for a long time. So that was how she had entered his life, through his father's guilt. When he looked up, she was standing in the doorway. "Were you looking for me?" she asked softly. "No," he lied, then added, "Yes, I was reading about the foundation. My doctor sent the recommendation," she said. "Your father helped pay for my therapy long before I met you. I wanted to thank him one day, but life had other plans." Adrian nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside him. "You just did." A few evenings later, the mansion's power went out during a storm. The hallways were filled with the sound of rain hitting the glass roof. Evelyn stepped into the dark corridor, her cane tapping lightly on the floor. "Adrian?" "I am here," his voice answered from the study. "Stay where you are. The generator will start soon." "Darkness does not bother me," she said with a faint smile. "You are the one who seems uncomfortable." "No." He laughed quietly, stepping closer until he was right in front of her. Lightning flashed, throwing pale light across his face. "I'm fine," he said. "No, you are not," she whispered. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitating, then found his cheek. The touch was gentle but certain, her fingers tracing the faint scar near his temple. "You flinch every time it rains. What happened?" He froze. It had been years since anyone mentioned the accident. His father's car, the flames, the guilt he never escaped. "It was my fault," he said finally. "I was driving that night." Her expression softened. "Then that is why you built walls instead of windows." He did not know how she could say something so simple and make it feel like truth. "You cannot see them," he murmured. "But somehow you still find every crack." "Maybe that is the only way to live," she said. "To feel where it hurts and call it home." When the power returned, their eyes met as filled with something unspoken. Hers turned toward the sound of his breath. From that night on, something changed. He started coming home earlier. She waited for him with tea ready. They talked more and slept less. The mansion no longer felt like an arrangement. It felt like the beginning of something neither contract nor time could explain. And yet, on Adrian's desk, the original marriage agreement still sat, signed, dated, cold as ever. He looked at it often, wondering what would happen if he tore it apart, or if she already knew he never truly meant a word of it. The morning of the annual Cole Enterprises board meeting arrived with a quiet tension that stretched through the mansion. Adrian stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. The reflection staring back at him was calm, but his mind was not. For the first time in years, he was not worried about shareholders or contracts. He was worried about how Evelyn would handle being in the spotlight. She had insisted on attending. "I am your wife, am I not?" she had said with a soft smile. "Even if it is only on paper, I should stand beside you when everyone is watching." Now she appeared at the doorway of his study, dressed in a navy gown that caught the morning light. Her cane tapped once on the floor before she folded it, memorizing her steps from the hallway. "You look beautiful," Adrian said quietly. "I cannot see it," she replied. But thank you for saying so. He offered his arm, and she took it. Her hand was light on his sleeve, but her confidence steadied him more than he wanted to admit. The ballroom was already full when they arrived. Cameras flashed. Murmurs rippled across the room like a tide. Every head turned toward the couple toward her. Evelyn heard the sound of whispers, the shuffle of expensive shoes, the hum of people pretending not to stare. She straightened her back and whispered to Adrian, "Walk slower. Let them look as long as they need to. I will not hide." He nodded, guiding her to the center table. When they sat, a board member named Mr. Lang leaned forward, his voice sharp with curiosity. "Mrs. Cole, it must be difficult for you, living in a world you cannot see." She smiled gently. "Sometimes, but it is much harder living in a world where people refuse to look beyond what they can see." A few quiet laughs circled the table, but Adrian could see how her words landed graceful, poised, cutting without cruelty. Later, when it was time for speeches, Adrian rose to speak. He talked about expansion plans, charity projects, and the future of the company. The crowd clapped politely, but when he mentioned the foundation for the blind, he saw Evelyn's fingers tighten slightly around her glass. Without planning to, he turned to her and said, "Evelyn, would you like to say something? The foundation is, after all, your world more than mine." A hush fell over the room. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she rose slowly, finding her balance by lightly touching the table edge. "Thank you," she began. "I was not prepared for a speech, but I suppose I have been preparing for moments like this my entire life." Her voice was soft but carried through every corner of the room. People think blindness means darkness, but that is not true. Darkness is what happens when people stop caring. What your company has done, what Mr. Cole has done, is not charity. It is a reminder that sight is a privilege, but compassion is a choice. The room was silent. Adrian stood still, watching her. For once, the woman who could not see was the only one everyone truly saw. When she sat down, the applause came in waves. It was genuine, not polite. Adrian leaned closer and whispered, "You just won over a room full of men who only believe in numbers." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should start believing in something else." That night, when they returned home, she excused herself to rest. Adrian walked to his office, poured a drink, and stared out at the city lights. His phone buzzed a message from his half-brother, Ryan. "She is impressive. No wonder father admired her. But do not forget, you married her for business. Keep it that way." Adrian's hand tightened around the phone. For the first time, he did not want to. He found Evelyn in the garden, standing beneath the terrace light. The night air moved gently through her hair. She turned at the sound of his steps. "You are amazing today," he said quietly. "I only spoke what I know," she replied. "That kindness should not be rare." He hesitated, his voice low. "You make it look easy." "It is not," she said, facing him. "Every time I walk into a room, I can feel the eyes that doubt me. But I have learned something, Adrian. Pity fades, but respect must be earned." "Oh." He looked at her, the soft light reflecting off her pale eyes, and realized he was no longer standing beside her out of duty. He was standing there because he wanted to. When she turned to leave, he caught her hand gently. "Evelyn," he whispered, I think I am starting to see things the way you do." She smiled, her fingers curling around his. "Then perhaps you are finally looking in the right direction." The night held them in stillness, and for the first time, Adrian felt that the world was not made of contracts or conditions. It was made of moments like this, small and unguarded, where love began quietly and asked for nothing in return. The following weeks passed, with a quiet warmth that felt almost fragile. Adrian had begun to leave his office early, sometimes surprising Evelyn in the garden, or joining her for tea in the small reading room she had claimed as her own. The staff whispered that the house finally sounded like a home again. Every evening, they talked. Sometimes about small things, music, weather, or the scent of rain. Sometimes about pain. She spoke of the accident that had taken her sight, and he, for the first time, told her about the night his car had crashed, taking his mother's life. The confession came slowly, like air from lungs that had been holding it for years. "It was raining," he said softly. "She told me to slow down. I thought I had everything under control." "No one ever does," Evelyn whispered. "Control is an illusion we build to hide from fear." Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. One afternoon, as he returned from a meeting, a group of reporters surrounded the gate. Cameras flashed, microphones raised. He heard his name, her name, and the words that froze his blood: contract marriage. Inside the mansion, Evelyn stood near the stairs, pale and shaken. A newspaper lay open on the table. The headline read, "CEO's blind wife, exposed marriage for inheritance confirmed." Adrian's chest tightened. "Evelyn, I can explain." She turned her face toward him, her voice quiet but trembling. "You promised me honesty, Adrian. You told me you wanted to see things as I do. But all this time, the world was laughing behind my back." "That is not what happened," he said quickly. "The papers twisted everything. I never wanted this to become public." "Then why did you sign it?" she asked, her hand tightening on her cane. "You said it was just business, but you let me believe it had changed." He took a step forward. "It did change. Evelyn, please." But she pulled away, shaking her head. "I was never part of your world. I was just a condition you had to meet. Now I understand why everyone looked at me like a story they already knew." Tears burned in his eyes, but he said nothing. She turned toward the stairs, her voice breaking. "I need to leave, Adrian. I need to find a place where people do not look at me with pity or lies." "Ivy, where will you go?" "Somewhere the light does not hurt," she whispered. That night, the mansion felt hollow. Rain beat against the windows, echoing the night they had first met. Adrian sat in his office, the marriage contract spread open on the desk. The ink of their signatures had faded, but the emptiness it carried had not. He could have destroyed it months ago, yet he had not. Maybe some part of him had feared what would remain once the paper was gone. Now he knew without her, there was nothing left worth keeping. His phone rang. It was Ryan, his half-brother. "I told you," Ryan said coldly. "Marrying her was a mistake. Sell your shares. Step back before this scandal ruins the company." Adrian's voice was steady. "You can take the company. I am done letting greed decide who I am." He hung up and walked to the window. The city glowed below, distant and uncaring. Somewhere out there, she was walking alone, guided only by sound and memory. "You once said darkness does not scare you," he murmured. "Then teach me how to find my way through it too." The rain kept falling, relentless and alive, washing over the glass like it was trying to erase every mistake he had ever made. But no storm could drown the truth now he had fallen in love with the very woman the world believed he had used. And losing her felt like the first real punishment he had ever earned. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn's absence became the loudest sound inside the mansion. The halls that once carried the quiet rhythm of her cane now echoed with nothing but silence. Adrian stopped attending meetings. The world outside kept talking scandals, headlines, gossip, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that she was gone. He learned from the driver that she had returned to the small town where she had lived, before the accident, volunteering at a community center for the blind. He wanted to go after her immediately, but guilt kept him frozen. How could he face her when everything she believed about him had turned into a lie printed on paper? One evening, he finally gathered the courage to go. The drive took 4 hours. The town was quiet, the air filled with the scent of pine and rain. He found her at the community hall, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, helping others read Braille letters by touch. She looked peaceful, content in a world that asked nothing of her. He stood in the doorway for a long time before she noticed his footsteps. Her head lifted slightly, sensing him. "Adrian," she said softly, "you should not be here." He stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "I had to see you. I needed to tell you the truth." "The truth?" she echoed, folding her hands. "The truth is that you married me to save your inheritance. Everything else was just kindness you learned to imitate." "No," he said quickly. "It started that way, yes, but it is not what it became. I kept the contract because I thought it was safer than admitting how I felt. I was a coward, Evelyn. You saw me better than I ever saw myself." Her expression softened, but her tone stayed guarded. "And what is it you see now?" He took a deep breath. "I see a woman who changed my life without ever needing to see my face. I see the difference between pity and love. And I see that I cannot move forward unless I make this right." "No." He reached into his coat and pulled out the contract, the same document that had started it all. It was folded, worn at the edges. He tore it in half, the sound sharp in the still room. "It is over," he said. "No conditions, no signatures, no debt between us. Whatever happens next will be real." Evelyn stood silent for a moment. Then she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and forgiveness. "You finally learned to see, Adrian," she whispered. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "Will you come back with me?" "Not yet," she said gently. "I still need to trust that what you see will not fade when the lights go out again." He nodded, understanding. There was no anger left, only the quiet promise that he would wait, however long it took. As he left, rain began to fall once more, soft and steady. This time, Adrian did not run from it. He let it wash over him, a cleansing storm that marked the end of the man he used to be and the beginning of the one she had taught him to become. Weeks passed since that night in the community hall, and Adrian kept his word. He did not try to force his way back into Evelyn's life. Instead, he began rebuilding himself in silence. He sold part of his shares in coal enterprises and redirected the money into a new foundation, one that would fund training centers for the visually impaired. He named it the Evelyn Trust, but never once told her. He did not want gratitude. He only wanted redemption. The press called it his public apology, but those who knew him saw something different. The arrogance in his eyes had faded. When he spoke to employees, he listened. When he walked through the city, he no longer hurried past the people asking for help. For the first time, Adrian Cole lived without hiding behind his last name. One morning, while attending an event for the foundation, he saw her again. Evelyn stood near the registration table, helping guests find their seats. Her hair was shorter now, and her smile gentler, but she still carried that quiet strength he could never forget. She turned slightly, recognizing his footsteps before he spoke. "You are early," she said softly. "I was told the founder of this new foundation would arrive later." He smiled, his voice low. "I could not stay away. It would have felt wrong to speak about hope without seeing the person who taught me what it means." Evelyn tilted her head, thoughtful. "You have changed, Adrian." "I had to," he replied. "Losing you showed me the kind of man I never want to be again." There was a long pause before she reached into her bag and pulled out something small. It was the torn marriage contract, taped carefully together, the creases still visible. "I kept it," she said quietly, "not because of what it meant, but because it reminded me that people can rewrite their stories." He looked down at the paper, then back at her. "Would you let me write a new one with you?" She smiled faintly. "If it is written with honesty, maybe." At that moment, the event coordinator called her name, asking her to lead the next presentation. Before she walked away, she turned to him and said, "Stay until the end, Adrian. I have something to show you." He nodded, his heart pounding in a way he had not felt in years. When she took the stage, she spoke about resilience, about learning to navigate a world that often looks away from pain. Her words were steady, filled with grace. But at the end of her speech, she did something that left the audience silent. "There is someone here who once built walls higher than mountains," she said. "But now he builds bridges instead. This foundation exists because he learned to see with his heart, not his eyes." Her sightless gaze turned toward where he stood. "Adrian Cole, thank you for proving that redemption is not weakness. It is love choosing to try again." The room erupted in applause, but he barely heard it. His chest ached with something deeper than pride. It was hope, the quiet kind that waits patiently in the dark until someone finally learns how to see the light. After the event, the news spread quickly. The foundation's success became the talk of the city. But for Adrian, none of it mattered as much as the quiet moment that followed. When the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Evelyn remained near the stage, her hands resting lightly on the podium. He approached her slowly, his steps careful on the marble floor. She turned toward the sound of his shoes, a faint smile already on her lips. "You stayed," she said. "I would not have missed it," he replied. "You were extraordinary." "Oh, so were you," she said softly. "You let people see who you really are." For a long moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by the echoes of applause that had not yet faded. Adrian took a breath. "Evelyn, I need to ask you something, not as a promise, not as redemption, just as a man who loves you." Her head tilted slightly, listening. "I want us to start again," he said. "Not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two people who choose each other freely. I do not care about names, wealth, or reputation. I only care about being the man you believed I could become." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Her hands traced the edge of the podium, as if feeling for something unseen. "Do you remember what I told you the night we first met?" she asked. That the world is not waiting for us to be perfect. It is waiting for us to be real. I remember, he whispered. Then here is what is real, Adrian, she said gently. You broke my trust, but you also rebuilt it with actions, not words. That is something I have never seen before, even when I could see. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve, moving up until they rested against his jaw. The same gesture that had once revealed his hidden scar now felt different, an act of recognition, not discovery. If we start again, she continued, there will be no contracts, no promises written on paper. Only one rule: tell me the truth, even when it hurts. I can do that, he said. Then you already have my answer, she whispered. That night, they walked outside together. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, its reflections scattered across the water. Evelyn stood beside him, the wind lifting her hair, her face tilted toward the sound of traffic and life. Do you still see darkness when it rains? She asked. Not anymore, Adrian said quietly. You turned it into light. She smiled, and for the first time since their wedding, he reached for her hand, not to lead, not to guide, but to hold. Their fingers intertwined easily, like two people who finally understood that love was never about seeing perfectly, it was about choosing clearly. Somewhere behind them, the last of the rain began to fall, gentle and forgiving, as if the sky itself had decided to bless their second chance. A year later, the Cole mansion no longer felt like the monument of a dynasty, it felt like home. The corridors, once filled with echoes of loneliness, now carried the quiet rhythm of laughter and music. Adrian no longer read reports at dawn or chased meetings until midnight. He still led the company, but now, his purpose was different. Every project carried the mark of compassion that Evelyn had taught him. On a bright spring morning, the garden was filled with guests. Rows of white tulips lined the walkway, their scent drifting softly in the breeze. It was not a grand affair, just family, friends, and the people from the foundation whose lives had become part of theirs. Evelyn stood near the fountain, her hands gently brushing the petals of the flowers she could not see but felt so vividly. Adrian walked toward her, holding something small, a simple ring, silver with a delicate pattern of raised dots. The inscription was written in Braille. It says, "Seen by you," he told her quietly, "because you were the first person who ever truly did." Her smile was calm and radiant, her voice trembling slightly. "You once promised me a year, but I think we found something that has no expiration." He took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. "This time, there is no contract," he said. "Only truth. Then it will last," she whispered. Applause rippled through the garden as they turned toward the crowd. It was not the applause of shareholders or reporters, it was the applause of people who had witnessed love rebuild what pride had broken. As the guests celebrated, Evelyn leaned closer and said, "Do you hear that? The music?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "The sound of life moving forward. It is the most beautiful thing to see." Adrian looked at her, realizing that her blindness had never been darkness, it had been clarity. The camera of the world might still call him a millionaire, but he knew the truth. Wealth was not measured by what he owned, but by who had chosen to stay when everything else fell apart. Under the sunlight, surrounded by laughter, he kissed her hand and whispered, "You taught me to see, Evelyn. Now I finally do." And with that, their story closed, not with signatures or conditions, but with the quiet certainty of love that had finally learned to see.